So I don't know if you remember the first time I did your show, you asked me, after all these crazy stories I've done, like the one in Georgia, a lot of these weird stories where I've had death threats, you asked me like which story shook me the most. And my answer was the Long Island serial killer story. And like, it's weird dipping back into this world. I forgot all the paranoia that was born out of this world. So basically, going back to the beginning, it starts with Shannan Gilbert, May 1st, early morning before the sunrise. She's a prostitute. She is hired by a guy, I believe his name is Joseph Brewer. Some of these details are still hazy, it's been so long, but he's a John. He buys Shannan Gilbert. She shows up, her driver's out in the car outside. This is in Gilgo Beach, the Oak Beach area, which is during the summer, a popular surfing beach area. In the winter, completely desolate. So May would be kind of busy. Something happens to Shannan in that house where she flees the house and calls 911, and she sounds like she has a psychotic break. I think it took them many, many years to even release that audio.
I heard that.
People say she was on, yeah, it's kind of fucked up. So she's screaming, she's maybe on drugs, we don't really know. And then she disappears. There was maybe a little search for Shannan Gilbert. Then they kind of gave up. You know, her family, she had a mother, sisters, all very worried, even though Shannan was out on the fringes of society. You know, she wasn't really at home, but they're like worried because it's, you know, their family member. So then that's it. And then there's an officer on Gilgo Beach on December 13th, like 6 or 7 months later. He's training his cadaver dog to look for bodies on the beach. And he finds remains. And he's like, oh my God, we found Shannan. So they get the cadaver, they test it. It's not Shannan. It's a different person. And it's this, I think it's Melissa Barthelme is the first victim they find, who's another prostitute who advertised on things like Backpage or Craigslist like Shannan Gilbert did. Then there's a snowstorm. The snow covers all the beach. They call off any more searching. A few days go by, they go back. They find like another body. They find another body. None of those are Shannan Gilbert. So now we're seeing what they call the Gilgo 3, Amber Costello and Megan Waterman. And then eventually they find Shannan Gilbert. And so those first 3 they found, though, were found in burlap sacks, lined up. I forget how far apart, but like a good distance apart from each other on that beach. And so this is also, people should know, not unlike the part of the beach where everyone goes to chill. This is on the other side, past the bramble by the bay. And it's very desolate on a very long, dark road. So
this is that kind of swampy. Like that Shane is is that kind of swampy area with all the tall grass I've been seeing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll see. There's lots of like video of them searching that stuff. They had people diving for bodies. So after all that, they found I think like 11 bodies. Most of them women. One of them was a baby. One of them was a man who was dressed like a woman. And I think they also found another woman who might have been the mother of that baby. Okay, so they don't know what the heck is going on. They're like, okay, this sounds like a serial killer. Because a lot of those women they found, they would eventually discover were selling themselves online. So,
and Shane, were they all prepared?
Yeah.
The bodies all prepared in the same, disposed of in the same way? All had the burlap sacks, all of them?
I don't think we know that yet. As far as I know, we don't know that. And what I do know is that the Gilgo 3 were in those burlap sacks. Shannan Gilbert is not considered one of those victims. They still think she's an accidental death, even though they did the coroner, Michael Baden, or Baden, I forget how you say his name, but he's like a celebrity coroner. He did an autopsy on her, and he said that I forget the name of the bone, but there's a bone that snaps when you're strangled from behind.
Is this the same guy? This is the same guy that did Epstein.
There you go. Same guy. He's done a lot of celebrity stuff. So I'll take it with a grain of salt with this guy because he's done some shady things. But anyway, they don't consider her a victim for whatever reason. So, but those 3 other women, the first 3 they found were found in burlap sacks. So then years go by. Let's see. The chief of police at the time, we would later discover was hampering the FBI's investigation to cover up his own corruption. This guy, in my opinion, is evil. And he's got a really interesting history. And not to psychoanalyze too much, but it's worth noting, and it's in my story when I was reporting on it. When this guy was a boy, he was in the woods and watched a bunch of other young boys murder another boy by stuffing rocks in his mouth. This is in Long Island. I mean, it's really dark stuff. So then this guy would grow up to become a cop before he got promoted to chief of police, he actually was caught with a prostitute in his patrol car. Right? So, and then during the investigation, he actually beat up a young guy who broke into his patrol car and stole sex toys.
Yep, and porn.
So and porn. So this guy went to jail. A lot of people think he was the killer. I don't know. I have no idea. I think he's a bad dude. And maybe, perhaps, he was not only hampering the investigation to cover his own tracks, but maybe he knew it, or knew who was involved. Because, when I started getting into this is now a few years after 2010. I want to say 2016, 2015 when I got into it. We had John Bittrolf, who's in jail. He's a serial killer from Manorville, Long Island, very close to here. He killed 2 prostitutes. And this is kind of like why I got really into this story, because how bizarre this was. He mutilated a woman and left her torso in the woods in Manorville. No one found her hands for a very long time until they found all those women on Gilgo Beach, and they found those hands like a decade or 2 decades later. So it's either, so I was like, wow, maybe he's connected, or maybe it's just like this dumping ground for these psychopaths. John Bittrolf he's maintained that he had nothing to do with this, which is, a lot of times there's people in jail for a serial murder who will claim murders that weren't theirs. I think that's interesting that he's saying that. He's a bad dude nonetheless. So then we have 13 years of a cold case. There are bodies all over Gilgo Beach. Some of them are connected to Manorville for whatever reason. I get involved. I go on this deep dive with amateur detectives as well as the authorities. I spend years on this case. The one thing that I uncovered in the story that is interesting, even more interesting today, is that we looked up this website. We found this website called Utopia Guide, and it's where, and I might have mentioned this on the first podcast I did with you. Utopia Guide has been around since the late 90s, and it's like a Yelp for hookers in Long Island in this specific area. And so it's just like a bunch of dudes sharing really gross reviews. They have a whole rating system about women they share, mind you. There's one guy who goes by the name Genius, and he writes for someone. Okay, so this guy's really disturbed. He writes extremely graphic, violent posts. So you could argue that maybe he's just a troll. He just found this website and he's just saying wild stuff. The other guys on this website, and there's a lot of them, they look at this guy Genius. They call his reviews epistles, and he would walk you through the whole process of how he does this, how he hides it from his wife while she's sleeping in bed, what time he would get up, all the burner phones he would use, how he would create all these aliases. So on top of that, which is okay, that's not so rare in that world, but on top of that, he would share these insane graphic posts about beating these women to a pulp, strangling them to near death. So when I found that out, it was just blew me away that this existed so openly. But this guy's post in particular, again, maybe it was just a troll, but something told me he was real, and he liked it, and he liked the getting away with it in public thing. Whether or not he's killing people, I don't know, but he liked being able to say, I do this to women, I'm doing it publicly. Like he would say, I do it in parking lots while you're in traffic. So I told the FBI about that. They never got back to me. I think they probably just thought I was a crazy person. The website is owned by someone who, says that the address is the Rock of Gibraltar. So I finished my story. There's no real answer. I go through all the various suspects. I think is probably a man of prominence, and he might be in construction. That's not just my theories. A bunch of us thought that. We thought that because of the burlap sacks. We thought that because if you can get away with this for such a long time in a fairly wealthy area, you must have some standing in this place. And that was it. And meanwhile, just one side note, because it's so dark, Shannan Gilbert, her mom, and one of her sisters, who were very vocal about this whole case, that sister ended up murdering that mother just randomly on some psychotic mental break, stabbed her 200 times. And just in a weird coincidence with me in the story, I happened to be friends with the nurse who took care of the sister when she snapped, and this is 3 hours north of Long Island. So it's I couldn't get rid of the story. I just couldn't escape it. So then we cut to a week ago. And now all of a sudden there's an arrest made, and it's shocking after 13 years of nothing. And it's this guy, Rex Heuermann, and he turns out to be a prominent man in Long Island who's an architect. Very interesting. The name was not on my list at all. I don't think he was on anybody's list, but that profile was. He is someone who seems very wealthy. He seems to be an architect working for, he had deals with American Airlines. Big guy also, which seemed consistent with a lot of people's beliefs, because either he drove down that highway and parked and carried these bodies through the bramble, through that marsh, and laid them down, or perhaps he took a boat across the bay, because he did live right across the bay. So yeah, and they got him because they were surveilling him, and he threw out pizza crust. And this was interesting when I read this, because it's the same way they got John Bittroff, 30 minutes away. They were surveilling him. He threw away a cup. They got it. They got the DNA. It matched actually with his brother, who was on probation. And then they got John. And oddly enough, I think Rex Heuermann's brother also has a past with, I think he killed somebody by accident in his car while high on something. I forget what. So yeah, they got this guy, Heuermann. It seems like they might have the guy. I don't know 100%, but they talk about him using burner phones. They talk about him using aliases. Yeah. They talk about him being obsessed with torture porn. They talk about him being obsessed with Googling himself, or what they believe to be himself, and the case in general. So it's like, I'm pretty sure if it is him, he probably found all of the things that any of us wrote about him. Robert Kolker wrote a book, The Lost Girls, about it. I wrote this really long story about it. There were millions, not millions, but there's hundreds of blogs, videos. So it seems like he is obsessed with himself. He seems like he has an ego. He seems really smart, clearly. So now here we are. I don't know what's going on yet, in terms of trial, but they seem to have found a lot of guns. Not that it means anything, because I don't think anyone was killed with a gun. It seemed like a lot of them were strangled, but I don't think we know that yet. But yeah, I'm incredibly shocked that they have somebody in custody.